Hello book lovers, my name is Maria. This is biblichorandmint. Subscribe for a good time. I finished 9 books in May and June, and I'm gonna make that your problem. You are now forced to sit here and listen to me talk about my thoughts and feelings regarding these books. Also, I do realize this is being uploaded in August. Let's just forget about that. Let's just pretend that it's beginning of July. So here's what we're getting into. The genre breakdown looked a little bit like this. I read 2 romances, 2 historical fiction, 2 fantasy, 1 general fiction, 1 literary fiction, and 1 science fiction. The total amount of pages that I read was 4,203, and I had an average star rating of 4.13 stars. I had 4 library checkouts, 3 of which were new releases, and I read 4 books from my physical TBR, which is great. I also got my very first ARC, so by the time this video comes out, it has already been out. It was released on July 29th, I'm pretty sure. Stick around for my thoughts on that one. Time to get into these reviews. Run the tape. It's basically a tradition now. Every year, we all collectively drop everything to read Emily Henry's newest book. This year, I read Great Big Beautiful Life holed up in a tiny cabin in the woods. No cell service, just me and my Kindle by the fire. This story follows Alice Scott, a relentlessly optimistic journalist who gets the career opportunity of a lifetime to write the memoir of Margaret Ives, a famous socialite turned recluse who hasn't been seen in the public in 30-odd years. But Alice isn't the only writer on the island. Enter Hayden, a quiet, sharp-edged memoirist who's her opposite in a lot of ways. The two of them are in audition to see who gets to tell Margaret's story. And of course, Margaret's got secrets. What unfolds is a story about legacy and how we decide which parts of our past to claim, and conversely, which parts of our past we leave behind. Emily Henry's prose is reliably beautiful and emotionally spot on. Her characters always feel like people you might actually know. Alice is a sunbeam of a human being, but not in an overly annoying way. And Hayden isn't just another cardboard grump. He's reserved and a little guarded, but a totally compelling character. Their differences are what bring them together because they are totally intrigued by each other. Now let's talk about Margaret. The elephant in the room is that she reads a lot like Evelyn Hugo. If you've read The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, you'll feel it. It's hard not to compare the 2 novels, which feature a mysterious older woman with a big secret to reveal and a young female journalist trying to get her story. Because of that, some of the twists in Great Big Beautiful Life didn't land as hard, they felt familiar and a lot a bit predictable. That said, Margaret is her own character and she is interesting. She's been out of the spotlight for decades, but she spent that time creating art that speaks for her in ways that she can't articulate. A couple of scenes where she discusses her art are genuinely moving, those light bulb moments where you suddenly get a deeper glimpse into the character's soul. And of course, as Alice is going through interviews with Margaret and getting her lore, so to speak, we start to understand Margaret and her motivations a lot more. At its heart, this book explores generational trauma and the idea that we carry the weight of our past, but we also have the power to choose what we do with it, which I thought was very powerful. It's not a classic 3-act romance, but there is romance, and it's tender and character-driven and a little bit weepy. I cried towards the end and also in the epilogue. So keep the tissues handy, I guess. If you're into emotional, introspective stories with great writing and compelling characters, you'll probably love this one. But if you've never read an Emily Henry romance, I don't recommend you start here. I recommend you start with either Book Lovers or Beach Read or even People We Meet on Vacation. I haven't read that one yet, so I can't really recommend it, but I've read the other 2, and they're a pretty good place to start. Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver is David Copperfield reimagined, which means absolutely nothing to me because I've never read David Copperfield. And as a matter of fact, I've never read anything by Charles Dickens. That just wasn't part of my English lit curriculum growing up. I read plenty of other classics, just no CDs. If you're like me in that sense, all you really need to know is that Charles Dickens wrote David Copperfield from his own experience as a survivor of institutional poverty. Barbara Kingsolver, may I call you Barbara? Kingsolver is a mouthful, so I'm just Barbara going forward. Okay, so Barbara takes that concept and applies it to rural Virginia during the early years of the opioid crisis to hammer home the point that issues of decades ago have yet to be addressed. I'll be honest with you, I don't feel fully equipped to review a book like this. It intimidated the heck out of me. I've had it on my shelf for over 2 years and I've put off reading it because of how heavy it is, both physically and emotionally. I don't have many words besides book good, but I'll do my best to do it justice. So we're following Damon Fields, nicknamed Demon Copperhead, from his chaotic birth to a teenage mother who is struggling with a substance abuse problem through foster care, addiction, and heartbreak as he tries to survive a world with circumstances set against him. This book is very much character-driven and paints a vivid picture of what life was like for some people in the American South in the late 90s and early 2000s, where institutions meant to help were just as broken as the families relying on them. Unfortunately, I don't think that's changed very much, and it's not contained to the South, but that's the backdrop of this novel. This story is above all human. It's funny, tense, messy, devastating, and chock full of emotion. There is a long list of secondary characters, some of which we get to see over multiple phases of Demon's life. One of them is his childhood best friend, Maggot, who goes through his own character arc that you witness both up close and at a distance, paralleling how friends come and go from each other's lives, which I thought was really cool. There are people who mentor Demon, people who love him, people who set him back when he seems to just be getting a hold of his life. That was very frustrating to witness. And there's a fair amount of social critique woven into the book. Sometimes it's subtle and built into the scene. Other times it's a straight up lecture on the page from a teacher in a classroom, especially when Barbara starts to get into the topic of the opioid crisis, which comes across angry, and rightfully so. Thanks to this book, I've done a lot more research into that time in American history, and it's aggravating. And the repercussions, unfortunately, continue to affect people to this day. So yeah, if you're looking for a novel that is sprawling, that packs an emotional punch, give Demon Copperhead a try. Rachel Gillig has secured her spot on my auto-read list ever since the Shepherd King duology. The Knight and the Moth follows Sybil Delling, who's spent the last 9 years serving as a diviner at Ashling Cathedral. Her job is to interpret visions she gets from 6 mysterious figures known as the Omens. People travel from across all of the Stonewater Kingdom, which is the fantasy kingdom in which this story is set, for her readings. The whole kingdom basically runs on and makes decisions based on those visions and premonitions sent down from the Omens. Sybil is actually one of 6 diviners, and as we join the story, they're all just a few weeks away from finishing their service at the cathedral. Since they were taken as foundlings, which I have taken to mean orphaned children, none of them really remember life outside of the cathedral. They're prepping for freedom, but also kind of terrified by it. Then comes Roderick, who is a knight, a skeptic, and way too attractive for Sybil's peace of mind, of course. He thinks omens are a scam and the visions are nonsense, which, as you can imagine, goes over great with Sybil, who is the most hardworking and rule-abiding of the 6 diviners. But when the diviners start disappearing, Sybil has no choice but to team up with him, and the answers they're looking for aren't at Ashling. So Sybil ends up setting out into the world beyond the cathedral anyways, not in the way that she wanted to, but you know, be careful what you wish for. I'll be real, it took me a minute to get into this one. The first few chapters are focused on world building and character setup, which is fine. I love getting dropped into a new fantasy world, but there was one early scene that really threw me. It's the scene where the diviners sneak out of the cathedral for a night on the town. Even though we've been told that they live these highly controlled, structured lives, they don't even know each other's names because of the rules that are set in place. So how are they pulling off a casual girls' night in the middle of it all? It felt inconsistent, and that kind of soured me for at least 50-ish pages. That said, I stuck with it, obviously, and I'm so glad that I did. Once the mystery kicks in and Sybil sets out to find her missing sisters, the plot moves. There's a great mix of tension, character growth, and slow burn chemistry between Sybil and Roderick. And Sybil, that's my girl. She's one of my all-time favorite protagonists now. She's tough, principled, and fiercely loyal. Her bond with the other diviners is the emotional core of this book. She's also ripped. She straight up body slammed someone at the beginning of the story, and I was actively cheering her on from the comfort of my couch. The ending of this one made me regret reading it so close to the release date, because now I have to live with this cliffhanger until the next book comes out. There isn't even a title for it up on Goodreads yet. I want to cry. Jurassic Park is what happens when science pushes too far and nature claps back hard. Why did I say that? That was such a boomer. That's like very 2016, very 2017 lingo. I haven't said clap back in years. I'm struggling. But yeah, billionaire John Hammond funds the creation of a remote island theme park filled with, spoiler alert, dinosaurs. Before the park even opens, he invites a group of experts, a paleontologist, a paleobotanist, a chaotician, and a lawyer. That was a mouthful. But they're there to sign off on it. Also tagging along are Hammond's grandkids because the park is supposed to be super safe. While the group is out on a tour of the island, the security systems fail, the dinosaurs escape their enclosure, and suddenly everybody is fighting to survive a prehistoric nightmare that they kind of saw coming, but walked into anyways. It's fast-paced, suspenseful, and surprisingly smart, diving into chaos theory, ethics, science, and corporate greed. To be honest, until a few years ago, I didn't know that the movie Jurassic Park was based on a book. I think the movie franchise really overshadowed the book because the movies are fantastic. And I will say that having watched the movies made the reading experience a lot better for me. I don't know if I would have been able to get through the first 100-ish pages of this book if I didn't know it was coming towards the middle end part of the story. It was a lot of science and a lot of theory. It also included a lot of diagrams and figures and data on the page, which was actually very helpful and made it more immersive, but slowed the story down at the beginning for me. I took like a month-long break right after getting through the expositions before I jumped back into the book and finished it. But when I picked it up, I was pleasantly surprised. Once we get the science out of the way, which was necessary to understand exactly how we got to the major issues of this world, I was locked in on the action. Once things start going wrong, you're on a 300-page ride until the end. Not kidding. I remember there being like 5 pages left and they were still in the middle of some pretty serious action. So it wraps up on a cliffhanger. And yes, there is a sequel. There are a lot of cool moments in this book that don't make it into the movie, so this is still worth the read if you're familiar with the franchise. One of my favorite scenes, and I use favorite loosely because it was actually horrifying, and if I were in that situation, I think I would actually involve the T-Rex under a waterfall. So yes, I recommend Jurassic Park. Just be ready for a little science lesson in the beginning. Caught Up is the sequel to Lights Out by Navessa Allen, which I read earlier this year. I'll link the video where I talk about Lights Out in the description and also in the card up here. Both are part of the Into Darkness trilogy, which are interconnected, standalone, dark romances. And you don't need to read them in order, but for this trilogy, I would. Lights Out followed Allie and Josh. Allie's an ER nurse and Josh is her stalker. So yeah, wild ride. Caught Up shifts focus to Junior and Lauren. Slight spoiler for Lights Out, so skip ahead a few seconds if you care, but Junior is Allie's cousin and the son of a major mafia figure. So I think this would be considered a mafia romance. Lauren is his high school crush, but the book picks up about a decade after high school. She's changed a lot and he's been keeping tabs on her ever since. Pining after her, if you will. Cue me screaming into a pillow at 2 a.m. while reading the scene where she finds out that he's been pining after her for a decade. This is dual point of view. Junior's storyline explores identity, how he identifies himself outside of his family's expectations, and Lauren's arc centers on reclaiming power after trauma, much of it linked to her past with Junior. Now she's independent, confident, and running her own businesses. She's also just so compassionate and emotionally grounded. My favorite quality in romance novels is when the two romantic interests come together to challenge but also to support each other, and that definitely happens a lot in the story. There is a lot of conflict they both need to work through, but they're also attracted to each other. So that injects a little bit of tension and fun into the mix. This book is definitely kinkier and plays with some bolder themes than Lights Out did, but it comes across as well researched and handled with care. At least that's how it came across for me. We also get cameos from Josh and Allie. Josh and Junior have a sort of bromance now, which is really endearing. And we also get a peek at who book 3 will follow, which I am so ready for. The Circle by Dave Eggers broke me. On paper, this should have been a 4.5 to 5-star read for me. I'm not sure if I've mentioned this before, but I have a rubric for how I rate books. I started using it when I started making these videos. It's how I stay mostly consistent across my reviews. But The Circle completely blew that system up. So what's it about? May Holland lands a dream job at The Circle, which is a powerful tech company that's essentially a mashup of Google, Apple, Amazon, etc. The company's mission is total transparency. Every part of society, from voting to healthcare to daily conversations, should be made visible and traceable. At first, May is totally in on the ethos. I think mostly because she wants to find some purpose in her life and also collect a check to pay for her student loans, which is very real. But as she gets more deeply involved with the company, we start to see the darker implications of a world where privacy no longer exists and where everything is tracked, recorded, and used to control us in the name of connection and safety. It's very Orwellian, to say the least. Now, here's where my brain broke. Based on the rubric, this book should score high. The plot is compelling and the themes are hugely relevant. Sometimes they're a little heavy-handed, but overall very effective. The characters, especially May, are infuriating and often unlikable, but they're complex. They're supposed to frustrate you. It's not a flaw, it's the whole point. The setting is well done. The Circle campus feels like a utopia on the surface, but underneath, it's all a surveillance state with open plan offices. The writing style is clear and purposeful. The pacing is up and down at times. Sometimes it's dragging, sometimes it's sprinting. But even that felt intentional in hindsight. So every criticism I have, I can logically explain, which makes this book so polarizing for me. I feel like some readers, me, will hate it. Others will think it's brilliant. It came out in 2013, but reading it in 2025, it's terrifyingly relevant. Data monopolies, tech companies hoarding our information, algorithms shaping how we think, it's all in here. And it forced me to look a little too closely at what our current reality is starting to feel like and look like. This book cracked open an existential spiral that I didn't ask for. I could make a whole video unpacking just this one novel. I could host a full-on Socratic seminar about it, but emotionally, I'm just not there. Was this review helpful? Honestly, I don't know. But if it makes you curious, maybe you'll pick it up. Maybe you'll even love it. I can't say that I did, but I definitely have emotions around it. Then I picked up 11/22/63 by Stephen King to course correct after The Circle. I needed something immersive, something that would feel like complete escapism, and what better escape than time traveling back to stop the JFK assassination. In 11/22/63, we followed Jake Epping, a high school English teacher in Maine who's recruited by a friend to finish a mission. Go back in time and stop Lee Harvey Oswald. Go back in time to stop Lee Harvey Oswald. Go back in time to stop Lee Harvey Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald from assassinating President Kennedy. There's a twist, of course. The portal only takes you to one moment in 1958. From there, Jake has to live through 5 years of the past, navigating small-town America, Cold War tension, and a romantic connection he didn't expect, all while preparing for one of the most pivotal moments in American history. But time, as it turns out, doesn't want to be changed. And the bigger the change, the more violently the past pushes back. Overall, I really liked this. Yes, it's over 800 pages, but it honestly reads like multiple novels wrapped into one. An omnibus, if you will. You've got the political thriller aspect, some historical fiction, a pretty big cameo with characters from another Stephen King novel, a bit of supernatural suspense, and a surprisingly tender romance subplot that totally hooked me. I'm a sucker for a romance subplot. What can I say? One thing that really stuck with me was this book's take on time travel. There's this persistent, almost sentient force working against Jake, especially as he gets closer to his goal. The final act, set in Dallas on the day of the assassination, is intense. I actually visited the Sixth Floor Museum a few years ago, so reading that scene with those visuals in mind was incredibly surreal. So like a lot of time travel stories, this one leans into some universal themes. Living in the present, letting go of regrets, and realizing that even if you change the past, the ripple effects might create a reality that you can't grapple with. I've read Stephen King's On Writing where he talks about his process around writing, and one thing that sticks out is that he seems to be what the writing community calls a pantser, like flying by the seat of your pants. Basically, he doesn't plot his stories, he just writes, and then in the editing phase determines the themes and patterns the story is already naturally portraying. I'd say this book is the epitome of that. As we're following Jake through his adventure in the past, sometimes it feels like we're just passing time, meandering. It was exactly the escapism read that I needed. Angel Down by Daniel Kraus is my very first arc, so big shout out to Atria Books and Nat Galley for letting me read that one. Here's the setup. Private Cyril Bagger is a con man forced into World War I because of the draft. He's not in it for glory or honor, he just wants to make it out alive and unscathed. To do that, he's weaseled his way into being his company's gravedigger, so he never actually sees the front lines. He's always trailing behind, digging graves. That is until one day he's called upon, along with 4 other soldiers, to go into no man's land to euthanize a fallen comrade. What they find, though, is not a soldier, it's a glowing woman. An angel. They decide to bring her back to camp, thinking that she could be the key to ending the war. But the further they go on their journey, the more twisted things get. The angel seems to be warping reality, and these already morally bankrupt men start unraveling really fast. Kraus absolutely kills it with structure and style. The book reads like a sermon. Every paragraph starts with and there are no periods. The whole novel is just one long run-on sentence, which is quite the feat, but Kraus manages to pull it off. It's very immersive since there isn't really like a place to stop, and towards the end, there aren't even paragraphs. We're just actively barreling towards the conclusion. These choices, and overall the way the book is written, is very cinematic. It reminds me of films like Dunkirk and 1917, which both play with elements of film to create intense tension. 1917, for example, is all one continuous take, which makes it super immersive. And Dunkirk, which was scored by Hans Zimmer, uses this auditory technique called the shepherd tone, which involves layering tones that create the illusion of a continuously ascending pitch. So there's never really a payoff in the musical arrangement, creating the sense of anxiety and dread. It's very cool. I'll link the Vox video I watched on it like 7 years ago or something. That's the only way I know about this. All 3 of these are works centered around war, so they obviously have that in common. Anyways, the cinematic nature of this story also makes sense because Daniel Kraus, while an author, also has a background in film. He co-wrote Shape of Water with Guillermo del Toro, which I only found out while researching for this review. The more you know. Overall, Angel Down is brutal, bleak, and brilliant, and made me feel anxious, revolted, and deeply impressed. I highly recommend it if you want a war story with a side of biblical horror and supernatural dread. And like I said, this was the first arc that I ever got, which was really cool. It's definitely on my list of books to buy when I'm out of my book buying ban. Now, coming in as a buzzer beater read is The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. This was the reason why I didn't get this video up sooner. I had fully intended to write up my notes and film this wrap up after reading and reviewing Angel Down, but then I picked up The Tainted Cup with 3 days left of the month and couldn't put it down. And then it was July, and then it was August, and here we are. Anyways, The Tainted Cup is what you'd get if Sherlock Holmes lived in a fantasy world with sea beasts and plant magic. Set in an empire that's constantly defending its shores from what they call Titans, the story follows Anna Delabra, a brilliantly unhinged investigator with a reputation for solving impossible cases. Her assistant, Dinius Cole, or Din as he likes to be called, is our narrator, a methodical, observant young man who's basically Watson if he had a photographic memory and a deep fear of emotional vulnerability. When a high-ranking officer dies under bizarre supernatural circumstances, Anna and Din are pulled into a web of mystery, corruption, and bioalchemy. And as the investigation deepens, it becomes clear the conspiracy goes way beyond the one murder and threatens the safety of the empire as a whole. This was a very enjoyable read for me as someone who was obsessed with RDJ's gritty steampunk Sherlock Holmes. Anna is just as quirky in her own unique ways, and Din makes a fantastic Watson. He is totally bewildered by Anna, but there are moments when he totally matches her freak. Their mentor-mentee relationship is the highlight of the story for me. And the mystery was fun. Robert Jackson Bennett did a great job of writing a fantastical detective noir story where you're confused for 90% of the development, but you're given enough to piece together how it'll come full circle. And you still get that aha moment at the end when they do like a big reveal scene. It's a lot of fun. And the setting, absolutely fascinating. Like I mentioned earlier, the magic system is entirely plant-based. In this world, plants, herbs, and fungi aren't just for medicine. They're woven into every aspect of life. Architecture, technology, even human augmentation. Din, for example, has an augmentation that gives him a perfect memory tied to sense. Others have enhancements for strength, mathematical skills, spatial awareness, you name it. These upgrades also come with visible side effects, so people end up with distinct, sometimes striking appearances. That just adds to the fantasy element of it all. I love when authors lean into that and we're not just getting a fantasy story that's like, everybody looks like humans and there is magic. and this person is like this crazy monster, but they look like a human 99% of the time. Like, that's fine. But I do like picking up books where it's like, it's weird. Like it's leaning into the really fantastical fantasy elements. Even practical details are rooted in the ecosystem. Air conditioning in homes works thanks to this specialized fungus. It's such a clever, immersive way to blend magic with everyday life. And finally, we get enough extra story and myth surrounding the Empire and Anna herself that makes picking up the next book pretty inevitable. Spoiler alert, I already read it and I enjoyed it, but that's for the next wrap up. That's all, folks. I hope my thoughts were helpful, and if not, at the very least, entertaining. I'll be back with my July-August wrap up on time, hopefully. Mark your calendars. I'm aiming for the first week of September. And as an update, I'm still going strong with my book buying ban. At this point, I feel committed to getting through the end of the year without buying a book, since I've been doing this for so long. So yeah, that's that. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. You can also follow me over on Fable, where we can chat about books, or TikTok for a silly, goofy time. I'll leave the links in the description below, but it's the same handle as on here, biblichorandmint. See you next time. Happy reading. My forehead is itchy.